the fourth epic novel by Dave Pilkey. Katz. Hello my little mouses, and welcome to the fourth time where I read a book from Dave Pilkey for you. It is called Captain Underpants, and it's a novel with a lot of different stories per book. It is more like a comic, so it is pretty new for me to read in this kind of style, but I hope you enjoy it. I have headphones in my ear because this is a high quality recording. I could just recommend you to put your headphones in as well to see how crystal clear the sound can be. Then, after you put your headphones in, you lean back, enjoy and listen to the words I whisper in your ear. My name is ASMR Katz, and I'm a heavily tattooed girl who show you the world of sound. If you already like this full picture here, feel free to follow me, to subscribe, and click on the notification bell, because I try to upload as much as possible ASMR clips for you. When you ask yourself what's the background here, that is our tattoo gallery from our tattoo shop Silent 25. So if you like the tattoo style I have on my body, then feel free to check out Silent 25 and you could get a tattoo in your way you like it and in your design in the same style than I have. So let us start. Captain Underpants and the Perilous Plot of Professor Poopypants, the fourth epic novel by Dave Pilkey. In our last 3 adventures, we try to save our crazy principal from disaster. He thought he was a real superhero, but he wasn't. We didn't think things could get any worse, but they did. The top secret truth about Captain Underpants. Once upon a time, there were 2 cool kids named George and Harold. They had a mean old principal named Mr. Krupp. Mr. Krupp was very mean to George and Harold, so they bought the 3D hypno-ring. They used to hypnotize Mr. Krupp. But they made a terrible mistakes. You are now Captain Underpants. Hey, come back, Mr. Krupp. Mr. Krupp thought he really was Captain Underpants, but he didn't have any superpowers. They had a lot of adventures. One time, they even got attacked by a UFO. They all got took into the spaceship and George stole some alien superpower juice. Then Mr. Krupp got eaten by a big evil dandelion, so George gave him some superpower juice. Then he got superpowers, and now Captain Underpants has amazing strength. He can even fly. The only way George and Harold can stop Captain Underpants from causing trouble is by pouring water on his head. This makes him turn back into Mr. Krupp. But beware, because whenever Mr. Krupp hears somebody snap with their fingers, he turns back into you know who. Tra-la-la-la. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. All of the experts at Jeremy Horwitz Elementary School had their opinion about George and Harold. The guidance counselor, Mr. Richter, thought the boys suffered from ADD. The school psychologist, Miss Labor, diagnosed them with ADHD. And the main old principal, Mr. Krupp, thought there was just plain old BAD. Bad. But if you ask me, George and Harold simply suffered from EBSAs, incredible boring school syndrome. You see, George and Harold were really bad kids. They were actually very bright, good natural boys. The only problem was that they were bored in school, so they took it upon themselves to living things up for everybody. Wasn't that thoughtful of them? Unfortunately, George and Harold's thoughtfulness got them into trouble every now and then. Sometimes it got them into a lot of trouble. And one time it got them into so much trouble, it almost caused the entire planet to be taken over by a ruthless, maniacal, mad scientist guy in a giant robot suit. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. All Hey New Swissland. As everybody knows, New Swissland is a small country southeast of Greenland. You probably know all about New Swissland's natural resources and systems of government. But here is something about New Swissland that I will bet you didn't know. Everybody in New Swissland has a silly name. Just as their president, the Honorable Chuckle Jingleberry McMonkeyburger Jack, or his lovely wife Stinky. They will tell you all about New Swissland's proud, silly name heritage. They will tell you about the cultural significance of silly names. And then they probably tell you a really long, boring story of how stupid tradition got started. Well, skip that part, okay? Just remember that everybody in New Swissland has a silly name, from the richest to the poorest, from the dumbest to the smartest. And speaking of the smartest, let me introduce you to the Professor Poopypants. That is a statue of him down there in the bottom right corner of the page. Now, Poopypants was probably the smartest person in all of New Swissland. He graduated at the head of this class at Chunky Coup Borgarnas University, and afterward spent all of his time creating wild and fantastic inventions. Let's look in on him, shall we? Back in his private library, Professor Poopypants was just putting the finishing touches on two wonderful new inventions. the Shrinky Pig 2000, and the Goosey Grow 4000. Professor Poopypants called for his assistant, Porkbelly Funky Shrunk. Mr. Funky Shrunk, Pippi yelled, "I am now ready to test my new inventions." Porkbelly took notes while the professor aimed his Shrinky Pig 2000 at a hideous pile of rubbish. Bloof! A powerful beam of energy blasted the garbage ahead. Suddenly, the largest pile of rubbish shrunk to the size of a gumball. "Hooray, it works!" cried Professor Poopypants. "Now I must try the Goosey Grow 4000. Pippi and Porkbelly aimed the Goosey Grow 4000 at an ordinary hot dog with mustard. Gzzzt went another bright beam of energy. Suddenly, the hot dog grew and grew until it crashed through the walls of the laboratory. "We did it," explained Porkbelly. "What do you mean, we?" yelled Professor Poopypants. "I did it. I'm the genius. You're just a lowly assistant, and don't you forget it." "Sorry, boss," sagged Porkbelly. "With these two inventions," explained Professor Poopypants, "I will be able to solve the world's rubbish problem and create enough food for everyone in the entire planet." Finally, it looked as if all of the Earth's dilemmas would be fixed forever. But who would have believed that in just a few short weeks, Professor Poopypants would be trying to take over the planet in a fit of frenzied rage? Well, dear readers, the tragical tale is about to unfold. But before I can tell you the story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 3. The Field Trip. Jeremy Horwitz Elementary School was having its big annual field trip to Peepypants Place. All of the kids had brought their permission slips and were lined up to get in the bus. George and Harold could hardly wait to eat pizza and play video games all afternoon. "This is gonna rule," said George. "Yeah, if we ever get there," said Harold. "Hey," said George, "let's change the letters around on the school sign while we are waiting." "Good idea," said Harold. So George and Harold ran over the sign and began their thoughtfulness. Unfortunately, the boys didn't notice the dark, forbidding presence lurking nearby in the bushes. "Ah," cried Mr. Crop, "I caught you boys red-handed." "Oh," said George. "Oh, Lord Harold, this is just a little joke." "A joke?" yelled Mr. Crop. "Do you boys think that's funny?" George and Harold thought for a moment. "Well, yeah," said George. "Don't you?" asked Harold. "No, I don't think it's funny," yelled Mr. Crop. "I think it's rude and offensive. That's why it's funny," said George. "Oh," said Mr. Crop, "you boys like to laugh, huh? Well, here's a good one. You two are officially banned from the school field trip. Instead of eating pizza, you spend the afternoon cleaning up the teacher's lounge. Isn't that funny?" "No way," said Harold. "That's not funny at all," said George. "That's cruel and unusual punishment. That's why it's funny," Mr. Crab snarled. Chapter 4. left behind. Mr. Crop marched George and Harold over to the janitor's closet. "You can use these supplies to clean the teacher's lounge," said Mr. Crop. "I want it bottled by the time we go back." Mr. Crop went back outside, climbed on the tool bus, and laughed loudly as the buses pulled away. The teachers all pointed at George and Harold and laughed too. "Rats," said Harold. "I thought we were going to have fun today." "We can still have fun," said George. "All we need is this ladder, that bag of powder paste, and those big boxes of styrofoam wormy thingies." So George and Harold carried their supplies to the teacher's lounge and got down to business. At the sink, George pulled the sprayer nozzles while Harold carefully tapped the sprayer handle in the on position. Then the two boys put the nozzle back, making sure the sprayer head was pointed in the right direction. Next, George held the ladder steady while Harold climbed up to the ceiling fan. There, he began scooping generous amounts of powdered paste on the top of the fan blades. "Is this right?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "Try to get most of it in the ends of the blades." "Got it," said Harold. George closed all the blinds while Harold adjusted their ceiling fan so it would turn on when the light came on. Finally, the boys filled the refrigerator up with worm-shaped styrofoam packing pellets. "This is gonna be fun," said Harold. "Not for the teachers, Lord George." Chapter 5. The fun begins. An hour or so later, the buses returned to school. All of the children got off, packed up their stuff, and got ready to go home. Mr. Veit, the science teacher, was on school bus duty. The rest of the teachers gathered around George and Harold and began teasing them. "You kids sure did miss a fun field trip," said Mr. Ribble. "The pizza was so delicious. Too bad you didn't get any." "I wanted to bring you back a pizza," said Mr. Mina, "but I ate it on the bus." He threw an empty pizza box at George and Harold's feet, and the teachers howled with laughter. "Maybe you can lick the cheese off the box," Mr. Crumb roared. The teachers eventually got tired of taunting George and Harold, so they retreated to the teacher's lounge to relax. "Hey, how come it's dark in here?" asked Mrs. Mina. As he flicked on the lights, the ceiling fan began rotating very slowly. Mrs. Ribble went to the sink and turned on the tap. Suddenly, the spray nozzle sprayer cold water all over her. "Ah!" she screamed. "Somebody turn the water off." The other teacher sprang up and tried to help. They all got sprayed too. The ceiling fan was rotating faster now, and some of the powdered paste had begun flying all of the fan blades. The teachers struggled with the tap, pushing and showing each other. Finally, somebody turned the water off, but not before everyone was full soaked. The ceiling fan was now spinning at the full speed. All of the powder on the fan blades had been flowing off, and it was now floating down on the weak teachers. "Hey, what the?" cried Mr. Mina. "What's all this sticky stuff?" yelled Miss Antrophy. By now, all of the teachers were covered in gooey, sticky paste. It didn't take a genius to know that George and Harold were behind all this. "Those brats had better not have touched my diet cola," Mrs. Ribble shouted. She dashed to the refrigerator and swung the door open. Suddenly, thousands of tiny styrofoam pellets flew out into the room. The wind from the ceiling fan blew the pellets around and around. Naturally, they landed on the stickiest thing in the room, the teachers. "Wah!" screamed the teachers. They ran out of the teacher's lounge, screaming and yelling. George and Harold saw what looked like a group of giant evil snowmen heading straight towards them. "I've got a good idea," said George. "What?" asked Harold. "Run!" Chapter 6. Bye-bye, Mr. Fight. The next day, George and Harold's science teacher, Mr. Fight, knocked on Mr. Crubb's door. "What do you want?" barked Mr. Crubb. I've come to resign," said Mr. Fight. I just can't take it anymore." "No, hold on, pal," sighed Mr. Crubb. "Being a teacher is hard work. You can't just quit your job when things aren't—" "You don't understand," said Mr. Fight. "I think I'm cracking up." "What do you mean?" asked Mr. Crubb. "Well," said Mr. Fight, "it all started a few months ago when I had this dream that I got eaten up by a talking toilet. Then I started hearing cats and dogs meowing and growling in the classroom. Then I imagined that the school got flooded with sticky green goop, and just yesterday I thought I saw a group of abnormality snowmen chasing two boys down the hallway." No, wait, just a minute, Morty," said Mr. Crubb. "All of that can be explained." "And a few days ago," said Mr. Fight, I saw a big fat bald guy in his underwear fly out of the window." "Holy cow," said Mr. Crubb. "You are crazy." So Mr. Fight handed in his resignation and left Jemery Howard's elementary school for the greener pastures, the Pico Valley home for the reality changelet. "Now, where I'm going to find a new science teacher on such short notice," said Mr. Crubb. "Where? Or where?" Chapter 7. Here or here? Remember that Poopypants guy I was telling you about back in Chapter 2? Well, things hadn't been going too well for him in the past several weeks. Professor Poopypants had come to America to share the Shrinky Pig 2000 and the Goosey Grow 4000 with the world, but nobody seemed to want to hear about his inventions. They were all too busy laughing at his silly name. Poor Poopypants had been laughed out of every major citizen institution in the US. He'd been giggled out of Georgetown, howled out of Harvard, yuked out of jail, snickered out of Stanford, and chuckled out of Chattanooga State Technical Community College. Professor Poopypants was running out of the money, and there was no place left for him to turn. Then, one day, the professor walked into a New York coffee shop and picked up a newspaper. And like a message from heaven, Poopypants found his answer. "That's it," he cried. "I become an elementary school science teacher." "I work really, really hard, and soon people will come to respect me and see what a genius I am. Then I can introduce my great inventions to the world." Poopypants was certain that he once place people wouldn't laugh at his name was at an elementary school. Kids are so accepting and loving, he said. You can always count on the sweetness and innocence of children. Chapter 8. The sweetness and innocence of the children. Hello, boys and girls, said the professor a week later. I'm going to be your new science teacher. My name is Professor Poopypants. All right, settle down, boys and girls. Yes, it's a funny name, I know. But let me explain how I get this name. Please, children, settle down. It's not that funny, let me assure you. Boys, girls, please stop laughing. All right. I'm going to count to 10, and when I'm done, I want all of you to be quiet down so we can learn about the wonder world of science. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5. Oh, children, please stop laughing. I knew you all very far behind in your lessons, and we got a lot of catching up to do. Boys and girls, stop it. I'm not going to tell you again. It's not funny. There's no reason at all for you to be laughing at my name. I am sure we all have funny names if you think about it. Stop it right now, okay? Boys and girls, I just wait until you all settle down. I can't wait. A week later, things hadn't got any better. Professor Poopypants was really beginning to get angry. How am I going to get through these children, he asked himself. Hey, I've got it. I'll create a wonderful new invention. Chapter 9. The Gerby Jogger 2000. The next morning, Professor Poopypants came to school with an odd-looking miniature robot. Look, children, he said, I've created a new invention using the principles of science. I called it the Gerby Jogger 2000. The children stopped laughing for a moment and looked with interest at Professor Poopypants' new invention. You see, children, said the professor, some people like to jog, and their pets like to jog along beside them. That's fine if you have a dog or a cat. But what if you have a pet gerbil? It used to be a big problem, but not anymore. Professor Poopypants opened a glass dome and the Gerby Jogger 2000 and inserted a cute fuzzy gerbil. The gerbil pushed his tiny legs against the simple controls, and suddenly the machine came to life. In no time at all, the gerbil was jogging around the classroom in his robot suit. The children were delighted. Wow, said Connor Mancini. Science is cool. All of the other children agreed. This is wonderful, thought Professor Poopypants. I've reached them. Now I can teach them. Excuse me, said George to the professor. What's your middle name? My middle name, said the professor proudly, is P. Why do you ask? At the point, the children picked up where they had left off, laughing at Professor Poopypants' ridiculously name. The professor began to shake with anger. Tiny veins in his forehead started growing, and his face turned bright red. I can't take much more of this, the furious professor said through clenched teeth. I think I might blow a fuse if just one more thing happens. Chapter 10. just one more thing. Soon, afterwards in reading class, the children all heard the story of their Pete Peeper of Hamelin. You know, said George, that story gives me an idea. So George and Harold began working on their newest comic book, Captain Underpants and the Pete Pooper of Picure. That afternoon, they sneaked into the office and ran off copies of their new adventures to sell in the playground. And everything would have been just fine if one of the third graders hadn't left his copy lying around in the hallway. Chapter 11. Captain Underpants and the Pete Pooper of Pig. Once upon a time, in the city of Pig, there was a science teacher whose name was Poopypants. Everybody laughed at his funny name. This made Pippi mad. So he built an army of Gerbil Jogger 2000s. He put a Goebbels in each one, but he couldn't make them do any evil stuff. Then he thought of evil plan. He made a bunch of little headphones and put them on the Goebbels. Soon, Professor Poopypants' army of Gerbil Jogger 2000 were off on evil rampage. They all headed straight for the school. Help! The Gerbil Jogger 2000 broke in the cafeteria. They just knocked over some cupcakes and now they are attacking the gym teacher. Quick, somebody save the cupcakes. Professor Poopypants and his evil army rounded up all the children. This looks like a job for Captain Underpants. What seems to be the problem? I'm taking these kids to be my slaves. And just who do you think you are? I am Professor Poopypants. Professor Poopypants was really mad, so he pressed a button on his booty. And his booty transformed him into a giant cyborg. They had a big fight, but Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding wasteland, more powerful than boxer shorts, and able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie. Professor Poopypants chased our hero to a car's garage. I've got you now, waistband warrior. Now I'm gonna crush you. Captain Underpants pressed a button on his utility voice band, and out popped the tiny toilet of truth. Captain Underpants aimed the tiny toilet of truth of the Robbie Peepee. Flush. I'm rusted. Captain Underpants saved the day. But what about the evil Goebbels? They are not evil. Look, Professor Poopypants was controlling them with this. Is it music? No, listen. So Captain Underpants destroyed the controller. Hooray for Captain Underpants. Notice, all animal cruelty was simulated. No actual Goebbels were forced to listen to here. Professor P goes crazy. In his entire life, Professor Poopypants had never been as angry as he was at the very moment. As he stood in the hallway, something inside his fragile brain snapped. He began shaking and sweating uncontrollable. Suddenly, a wicked smile stretched across the professor's face. He staggered toward his empty classroom, mumbling to himself and giggling. He had hit rock bottom, and he decided to pull the rest of the planet down with him. Poopypants was going to take over the world. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you... Oh, never mind. I just tell you that story. Chapter 13. Honey, I Shrunk the School. Professor Poopypants opened the storage cupboard in his classroom and took out the Shrink Pig 2000 and the Goosey Grove 4000. He also grabbed the empty Gerbil Jogger 2000 and stumbled outside with his inventions. The crazed Befores giggled wildly to himself as he aimed the Goosey Grove 4000 at the Gerbil Jogger 2000. Suddenly, the Gerbil Jogger 2000 grew 10 stories high. Professor Poopypants began his long climb up the side of the giant Gerbil Jogger 2000. It took almost an hour, but eventually he reached the huge glass dome at the top and squeezed his way inside. "Mommy," said a little boy who was walking by with his mother. A little old man just crawled into a giant robot suit and is about to take over the school. "Oh, for heaven's sake," said his mother. "Where do you come up with this nonsense? Next, you will be telling me that a giant man in his underwear is fighting the huge robot in the middle of the city." Professor Poopypants was now in control of the colossal Gerbil Jogger 2000. He reached down with its might arm, picked up the Shrinky Pig 2000 and aimed it at school. Just then, George and Harold looked out of the window. "Hey," said George, "isn't that the Gerbil robot thingy?" "Yeah," said Harold. "Why is this so big?" "I don't know," said George, "but it's getting bigger by the second." "Oh," said Harold, "I don't think it's getting bigger. I think we're getting smaller." Chapter 14. The Perilous Plot. Professor Poopypants reached down and picked up the tiny school with his giant robotic hand. Everyone screamed in horror. In no time at all, eyewitness newswoman Ingrid Ashley was on the scene. "What do you want from us?" shouted reporter Ashley. "I want a pencil," screamed Professor Poopypants. "A pencil?" asked reporter Ashley. "Here, take mine." She tossed a yellow pencil towards the giant robot. Professor Poopypants reached down with his giant robot arm, picked up the Goosey Grove 4000 and aimed it at the pencil. Whoosh! The pencil grew to the size of a tree trunk, and Professor Poopypants grabbed it. "Follow me," he said. The giant robot led the news crew to the center of downtown Pig. There, he found 3 large white billboards. He put down the Shrinky Pig 2000 and the Goosey Grove 4000 and began writing on the billboards with his giant pencil. Chapter 15. The Name Change O-Chart 2000. Professor Poopypants spent several minutes jotting down a complex code on the 3 giant billboards. George and Harold, along with nearly 1,000 of their fellow shrunken students, watched the mad professor from the terrifying clutch of his giant robotic hand. "What is the crazy guy up to?" asked Mr. Crab from his office. "I will tell you," shouted Poopypants. "Everybody on the planet must now change their names into silly names using the 3 charts. Anyone who refuses will get shrunk." "How do the charts work?" asked Mr. Crab. "It's easy," said Professor Poopypants. "What's your first name?" I'm not telling, said Mr. Crab. What is your first name? Shouted Professor Poopypants. All right, said Mr. Crab. It's Benny. All of the children giggled. So the first letter of your first name is B, said Pippi. Now look at the first chart and find the letter B. Mr. Crab looked at the chart. It says B, lumpy, he whined. Good, said Professor Poopypants. Your new first name is Lumpy. All of the children laughed. Lumpy Grub, moaned Mr. Crab. I don't want to be called Lumpy Crab. You won't, laughed Professor Poopypants, because you have to change your last name too. Oh, said Mr. Crab. Your last name is Crab, said the professor, which starts with a K and ends with a P. Now find the letter K and the second chart on the letter P on the chart. Mr. Crab looked at the two charts. It says K, potty, and P, biscuit. Wonderful, shouted the professor. Your new last name is Poppy Biscuits. Oh no, groaned the principal. My name is Lumpy Potty Biscuits? The children are howled with laughter. Don't laugh too hard, kiddies, said Professor Poopypants. You all have to change your names too, or I shrink you again. Well, as you can imagine, nobody to Red Gun shrunk twice. So everybody looked at the three charts and figured out their name. My name is Stinky Gizzard. Stinky Gizzard Chunks. Stephanie Jarkov became Snotty Gorilla Bass. Robbie Stationberg became Loopy Pizza Pants. And poor little Janet Warwick became Poopsie Chucklebutt. This may be the most terrible moment in all of human history, said the local news reporter to their audience. It seems that everyone on Earth must now change his or her name to avoid getting shrunk. Good luck to you all. This is Chim Chim Diaper Brains reporting for Eyewitness News. Now, back to you, Booger. Chapter 16, Fluffy and Cheeseball. This is Fluffy Toilet Nose and Cheeseball Waffle Flaney. Fluffy is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Cheeseball is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. We've got to do something, cried Fluffy. But what? said Cheeseball. We are smaller than 2 mice. What could we possibly do? Let's go find our old friend Captain Underpants, said Fluffy. So Fluffy and Cheeseball ran to Mr. Potty Biscuit's office and found him cowering under his desk. I can't believe I am about to do this, said Fluffy. But here goes nothing. Fluffy snapped his fingers. Suddenly, a strange change came over Lumpy Potty Biscuits. His worried frown quickly turned into a heroic smile. He rose from behind his desk and thrust out his chest. In no time at all, Mr. Potty Biscuits had removed his outer clothing and tied a red curtain around his neck. "Tra-la-la-la," sang the hero. "Captain Underpants is here." "Cool," said Cheeseball. "But from now on you have to call yourself Buttercup Chicken Fanny. The guy in the Gerbil suit says so." "Hey," said Captain Underpants, "I don't take orders from anybody." "Great," said Fluffy. "Now fly out that window and bring back that big machine, what the lava lamp on top." "Yes, sir," said Captain Underpants. Chapter 17. Captain Underpants to the rescue. Captain Underpants flew down to the ground and grabbed the Goosey Grove 4000. But on his way back up, he was spotted by Professor Poopypants. The evil professor zapped Captain Underpants with a bolt of energy from the Shrink Big 2000. Suddenly, the waistband warrior began to shrink even smaller than before. He flew back to the tiny school carrying an extremely small Goosey Grove 4000, and he dropped it into Fluffy's hand. "Hey, where's Captain Underpants?" asked Fluffy. "I don't know," said Cheeseball. "I think he got shrunk so small that we can't see him anymore." "Well," said Fluffy, "at least we have this little invention thingy." "How that is going to help us?" asked Cheeseball. "I saw Professor Poopypants use it to make the pencil grow really big," said Fluffy. "It's our only hope of ever getting back to normal size." "I hope it still works," said Cheeseball. Fluffy and Cheeseball dashed to the school kitchen and climbed up the ladder onto the roof. "Maybe if we zap the school with this thing, everybody will grow back to normal," said Fluffy. "Good idea," said Cheeseball. "Then we can all run away." Chapter 18. Are you there? "God, it's us, Fluffy and Cheeseball." Fluffy pointed the Goosey Grove 4000 at the roof of the school and got ready to press a button. But the boys were spotted by Professor Poopypants. Quickly, he turned his mighty robotic hand, and Fluffy and Cheeseball slid off the roof. Downward they tumbled through the air. "Oh no," shouted Cheeseball. "We are doomed." "Wait a second," cried Fluffy. "Do you have a piece of paper on you?" "Yeah," screamed Cheeseball, "right here in my pocket." "But what good is it gonna do us now?" "Quick," cried Fluffy, "fold it into a paper airplane." "What kind of paper airplane?" asked Cheeseball. "Any kind," screamed Fluffy. "Just do it now." Quickly, Cheeseball folded the paper into a goofy-looking glider. "How's this?" he screamed. "Great," yelled Fluffy. "Now, hold it steady." Fluffy pointed the tiny Goose Grove 4000 at Cheeseball's airplane, and he pressed the button. Zzzt. Suddenly, Cheeseball's airplane grew to an enormous size. Fluffy and Cheeseball flopped down into it, and the paper airplane took off, gliding through the air. "Oh man," cried Cheeseball, "I can't believe that it worked." "We are not out of this yet," yelled Fluffy. Chapter 19. The Flight of the Goofy Glider. Fluffy and Cheeseball had to admit that it was pretty cool flying over the city streets on a paper airplane. They didn't even seem to mind the fact that they were only about 2 centimeters tall each. But you can probably imagine the boys' concern when they started heading straight for a wood chipper. "Oh no," cried Fluffy. "We're gonna get wood chippered." Cheeseball couldn't look. He put his hands over his eyes and waited for the inevitable. But suddenly, swoosh! The paper airplane swirled sharply and missed the wood chipper altogether. "Hey," cried Fluffy, "how did it happen?" "I don't know," said Cheeseball. "I'm not steering this thing." The boys had barely caught their breath when a small dog noticed the airplane and came running after them. "Oh no," cried Cheeseball. "We're gonna get eaten by a sausage dog." Fluffy covered his eyes this time. But wouldn't you know, the airplane swerved sharply upward and out of the range of the little dog. "Are you doing that?" asked Cheeseball. "No," said Fluffy. "It must be the wind." Finally, the paper airplane landed in a wet, sticky pile of hot tar. "Ugh," said Fluffy. "What could be worse than getting stuck in a pile of tar?" "Maybe getting crushed by a big steamroller thingy," said Cheeseball. "You sure have an active imagination," said Fluffy. "No, I don't," said Cheeseball, as he pointed upward. "Look." "Oh no," screamed Fluffy. "We're gonna get steamrollers sing to death." Just then, the boys were yanked up the backs of their shirts and carried off through the air to safety. "Something's got hold of us," cried Cheeseball. "But I can't see what it is." "It must be Captain Underpants," said Fluffy. "We just can't see him because he's so small." "Hey," said Cheeseball. "I bet he was steering the airplane out of danger too." "Our hero," the boys shouted. Chapter 20. Extra, extra large underpants. Fluffy and Cheeseball landed safely in an abandoned alley. "We've got to enlarge Captain Underpants so he can fight Professor Poopypants," said Fluffy. "The fate of the entire planet is in our hands." "But how can we enlarge him if we can't even see him?" asked Cheeseball. "Good question," said Fluffy. "Wait," said Cheeseball. "I've got an idea." He called out as loud as he could. "Captain Underpants, we can't see you. But if you can hear us, fly over our land on my finger. We have a machine that can make you big again." The boys waited a few seconds. "Look, Fluffy," said Cheeseball. "There he is. See? He's that little tiny speck on my finger. Now, just aim the machine at the little speck. But don't zap my finger, okay?" "Don't worry," said Fluffy. "I'm great shoot with this thing. I won't zap you." Gzzz. "Oops. Sorry." The good news was that Captain Underpants had grown larger and was now visible. The bad news was, well, let's just say that Cheeseball was going to have an awful hard time picking his nose with his right hand from now on. Fluffy gave Captain Underpants a few more shots from the Goosey Grove 4000. The waistband warrior grew and grew and grew until he was 10 stories high. Finally, the colossal captain headed towards the Perilous professor. A showdown was about to begin. The little boy from chapter 13 happened to be walking by with his mother again. He looked up and saw a giant man in his underwear getting ready to fight a huge robot in the middle of the city. "Mommy," said the little boy. "What?" asked the mother. Never mind," said the boy. The incredible graphic violence chapter in Flip-Floporama. Warning: the following chapter contains scenes that are so intense and horrific they may not be suitable for viewing by people who can take a joke. If you are easily offended, or if you tend to blame all of society's evils on TV shows and cartoon characters, please run to your nearest supermarket and get a life. They are looked into a Get Real section next to the glues. Good luck. Professor Poopypants packed a powerful punch. But the head button hero holded the horror. The brief-wearing bandit battled the bionic behemoth. The waistband warrior won the war. The 22nd chapter. Professor Poopypants had been defeated and everybody in the school cheered widely. They were still small, but at least they got their old names back. "I'm so glad I don't have a silly name anymore," said Mr. Ribble. "Me too," said Mr. Rected. "Hooray!" cried George. "Let's all give Captain Underpants a big hand." Harold was not amused. "Oops," said George. "Sorry." "That's okay," said Harold. "Just give me that invention thing so I can zap us back to normal." Harold held the Goosey Grove 4000 in his giant hand and zapped George and himself, that is, every part of himself except his giant hand. Suddenly, George and Harold were back to their normal sizes again. "Boy," said George, "we sure have tested the limit of science today." "Yep," said Harold, "and the limits of our readers' willing suspension of disbelief." Yeah," said George, "that too." George and Harold picked up their tiny school and carried it back to where it belonged. George got ready to zap the school with the Goosey Grove 4000, while Harold prepared to zap Captain Underpants with the Shrinky Pig 2000. "I sure hope this works," said George. "Me too," said Harold. Chapter 23. To make a long story short. It did. Chapter 24. The chapter before the last chapter. George took Captain Underpants over the bushes behind the school and ordered him to dress back up like Mr. Crab. "Let's go, Paul," said George. "We haven't got all day." Then Harold had some fun with the garden hose. In no time at all, Mr. Grub was big to his old nasty self again. Soon the cops showed up to arrest Professor Poopypants. "There's one thing I don't understand," said George to the professor. "Wouldn't it have been smarter to change your own name instead of forcing the rest of the world to change theirs?" "Gosh," said Professor Poopypants, "I never thought of that." A few weeks later, George and Harold received a letter from the big state penitentiary. "Dear George and Harold, sorry about trying to overhaul the world and everything. I've decided to take your advice and change my name so that people won't laugh at me anymore. From now on, I'll be going by grandfather's name on my mother's side. It's such a relief knowing that nobody will ever make fun of my name. Signed, Tippy Tingle Trousers." Chapter 25, the chapter after the chapter before the last chapter. "You know," said George, "I really learned something today." "What's that?" asked Harold. "I learned that it's not nice to make fun of people," said George. "Whoa," said Harold. "I think this is the first time one of our stories ever had a moral." "Probably the last time," said George. "Let's hope so," said Harold. But George and Harold had forgotten all about the other morale they had learned along the way, which was, don't ever, ever, ever hypnotize your principal. Because if you do, your life can go from bad to worse at the snap of a finger. "Oh no," screamed Harold. "Here we go again," screamed George. "Oh la la la." When Dave Pilly was a kid, his teachers thought he was disrespect, behaviorally challenged, and in serious need of a major attitude adjustment. When he wasn't writing sentences in the detain room, he could usually be found sitting at his private desk out in the hallway. There, he spent his time writing and drawing his own original comic books about a superhero named Captain Underpants. It was always Dave's dream to publish a book about Captain Underpants. Now, that dream has come true 4 times. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Captain Underpants and the Perilous Plot of Professor Poopypants. It is the 4th epic novel. That means you can find in my timeline already 3 novels from this book, from this comic book. I actually have to say it is very long. I think we are like over 1 hour with all books, so it's very long for me to read. So in between, it is hard to find the right pronunciation and be aware. It is a really crazy task because you have to think about school, and when you sit there 1 hour full concentrated and reading all the time, I also have a bit of feeling that my voice is getting thinner. But I try just to give my best for you in ASMR style, and that you enjoy this little episode. If you are curious right now, feel free to check out all my other heart projects. I have a lot other ASMR clips, like food mukbang clips, where I go with you on the simplicity of sound, some private ones where I talk about my daily life, some philosophical ones, and ones with tattoo friends I take for enjoying the sound of ASMR together. My name is anuskatzz, ASMR Katz. I have a lot of different names because the World Wide Web is my playground, so figure out what I have to offer to satisfy your needs. You can find a lot. And if you already like this clip, feel free to follow, subscribe, click on the notification bell, and help me with your support to let my channel and my heart projects grow. I would be amazed if you write in the comments down how you actually liked that book, if you already know it from before, and all the thoughts you have in mind when you enjoy the clips on my YouTube channel. Because with every support I have the opportunity to grow here, and I would love to show you even more of the adventure of sound. Thank you so much for listening.